standard song, a la George Gershwin or Rodgers and Hart. I mean,
Picture this, Los Angeles, 1979. Backstage at the iconic Troubadour. The place is buzzing, guitars wailing through sound checks, drinks clinking, legends passing through the halls. Then suddenly, chaos. A young assistant bursts into the promoter's office, visibly shaken. Linda Ronstadt just stormed out of the green room. Again. The reason? A single name on the performance list. Not hers, not the Eagles. His. One look, and she was gone. No confrontation, no questions, just an icy exit and dead silence. For years, no one understood what really happened that night. And Linda? She never explained. No public feuds, no tabloid-worthy tantrums, just perfectly composed interviews and an image of unshakable grace. For decades, she kept that silence intact. But now, the silence is shattered. In a rare moment of raw honesty, Linda Ronstadt is finally revealing the 7 musicians she never forgave, the ones who bruised her pride, challenged her artistry, and exposed the darkest side of the music industry. And the list? It's not what you think. These aren't harmless spats or fading grudges. These are the stories that defined an entire era of rock and roll power plays, broken loyalties, and quiet revenge. The most shocking part? Some of the names on that list were once her closest allies. First on the list, a drummer turned superstar who used her as a stepping stone, and then stepped all over her. And if you think you know who it is, think again. The night Jim Morrison crossed the line. It was 1968. The summer of love had passed, but the chaos hadn't. The Doors were electric, burning through every stage they touched, and Linda Ronstadt was still fighting tooth and nail to carve out her place in a male-dominated industry. That night, at a private after-party near the Whiskey A Go-Go, legends and misfits mixed freely. But no one expected what happened when Jim Morrison spotted Linda. He was already several drinks in, shirt half unbuttoned, swaggering through the crowd. Mid-performance, in a moment equal parts madness and ego, Morrison pulled Linda on stage without warning. It wasn't planned, it wasn't cute, it was reckless. And then, he leaned in. Right in front of everyone, he tried to kiss her. Linda recoiled instinctively. Morrison lost his balance, stumbled into her mic stand, and nearly brought the entire setup crashing down. Gasps, stares, whispers. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or panic. The moment was never caught on camera, but it became underground legend, passed around backstage and through late-night radio stories for years. Morrison never apologized. In fact, he doubled down. Months later, in a radio interview, he mocked her, calling her sweet but spineless, dismissing her as harmless, forgettable. Linda didn't clap back publicly. She never did. But behind closed doors, her words cut deep. Within her inner circle, she called Morrison a brilliant wreck who poisoned everything around him. To her, he wasn't just a chaotic performer. He was a symbol of the toxic masculinity that tried to dominate every corner of the music world. And while Morrison's antics left emotional bruises, the next betrayal wasn't delivered with slurred words or drunken kisses. It came during a moment of unity, when Linda thought she was among friends, a cause she believed in, a movement she'd risked her career to support, until one of her so-called allies turned on her. When genius becomes cruelty, Frank Zappa. Their meeting in 1974 had the buzz of something iconic. Frank Zappa, avant-garde, unpredictable, the mad genius of experimental rock. Linda Ronstadt, genre-defying, vocally unstoppable, and on the rise. On paper, it was a collaboration that could have redefined boundaries. Instead, it collapsed in a matter of hours. It started with promise. Linda expressed genuine interest in recording one of Zappa's tracks, but as soon as they stepped into the studio, things went sideways. Zappa dismissed her creative suggestions with a smirk, calling her sound too sanitized. He accused her of trying to water down his music, turning raw art into a jingle fit for car commercials. The tension reached its breaking point during a live rehearsal. In the middle of the session, Zappa stopped the band cold. The room went silent. Then, in front of everyone, he sneered. "This is what happens when you hand real music to a pop singer." The room froze. Linda didn't yell. She didn't argue. She quietly packed up and walked out, humiliated, hurt, and done. She never returned, and she never collaborated with Zappa again. Publicly, she said nothing, but behind the scenes, close friends recall her words clearly. She called Zappa brilliant but brutal, a mind she respected, but a man she could never trust again. Still, creative differences with difficult artists were one thing. But what came next? That pain ran deeper, because the next name on her list wasn't an eccentric genius or a chaotic frontman. It was someone she once called family, a fellow trailblazer who turned on her when it mattered most. Punk provocation, Elvis Costello's public insult. It was 1979, and Cleveland was buzzing with energy. A major festival had drawn together icons and up-and-comers alike. Linda Ronstadt, fresh off a string of chart-topping albums, was one of the headliners. At the peak of her powers, she was an established force. That night, all eyes were on her, and one of them belonged to Elvis Costello. He was the new kid on the scene. Brash, brilliant, barely filtered. Punk rock's intellectual rebel with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. But no one expected what happened next. In front of a cluster of reporters, Costello sneered, calling Linda's set background music for brunch. It was more than a jab. It was a public humiliation. The comments spread quickly, and when Linda confronted him backstage, hoping for clarity or maybe even an apology, she got something else entirely. Costello, reportedly drunk and arrogant, looked her in the eye, threw another cold insult, and walked off without a word of remorse. Linda never looked back. To her, Elvis Costello represented something bigger than just one rude remark. He embodied a new kind of artist, clever but heartless, critical without compassion, not rebellious, just cruel for the sake of it. She saw no soul in his defiance, only ego. And yet, even that bitterness couldn't compare to the final heartbreak on her list. Because the last name wasn't a wild rocker or a brash newcomer. It was someone whose music should have harmonized with hers. A voice so compatible, it seemed like fate was trying to put them on the same path. But behind the scenes, the clash was undeniable. And what should have been a dream collaboration turned into a silent war. Laurel Canyon's fallout. David Crosby. In the golden haze of Laurel Canyon, Linda Ronstadt and David Crosby were once like musical kin. They shared not just stages and studio time, but an unspoken trust, rooted in the countercultural movement they both helped shape. Crosby's harmonies and Linda's genre-crossing vocals were part of the same revolutionary wave, and in those days, the bond seemed unbreakable. But by 1978, that harmony had turned to tension. During a vocal session for a collaborative track, Linda requested a simple key change, one that would better fit her voice. Crosby refused, brushing her off with a dismissive, "You should learn to adapt." What might have been a minor disagreement quickly snowballed. Heated words were exchanged, and their argument didn't stay in the studio. Within days, it had leaked to the press, turning into one of the most whispered about clashes in the canyon. But it didn't stop there. Crosby went public in Rolling Stone, calling Linda manufactured, implying she was more product than talent. For Linda, who had built her entire career on raw ability and creative instinct, it was a dagger to the heart. She didn't respond in interviews. She never did. But the silence she maintained was anything but passive. She made a quiet but pointed move. She banned his name from being spoken around her band and inner circle. Studio musicians were told not to bring him up. His music was removed from her tour playlists. It was as if he no longer existed in her world. To Linda, Crosby had betrayed not just a friendship, but a shared ideal of what Laurel Canyon once represented. Privately, she referred to him as a warning sign. Proof that even the most brilliant minds could be consumed by ego, drugs, and fame. And while Crosby's betrayal was personal, the next on her list was something colder. A public jab that turned punk poetry into weaponized cruelty. The drummer who got too big for his own beat. Before the Eagles became rock royalty, Don Henley was just Linda's drummer and backup singer, grateful for the spotlight she gave him. In the early 70s, Linda Ronstadt was the rising star, packing theaters coast to coast. Henley, he was the quiet guy behind the kit, soaking up the momentum of her fame. She gave him his first big break, but as the Eagles took flight, everything changed. Suddenly, Henley wasn't the humble musician anymore. His ego grew in lockstep with the band's success. The group that once opened for Linda now strutted through Sunset Boulevard like they owned it. Henley in particular began acting like the king of the canyon, brushing off the woman who helped launch his career. The breaking point came in 1975. Backstage at the Universal Amphitheater, Henley made a comment that still stings to this day. He mocked Linda's musical direction, sneering that she should stick to covers and let real songwriters speak. The words weren't just insulting, they were dismissive of everything she had built with grit, heart, and pure talent. Linda didn't just walk out, she revoked his tour credentials on the spot. No second chances. Whispers spread through the industry. Henley's arrogance had gone unchecked for too long. Friends and roadies spoke quietly of his cocaine-fueled tantrums, his ego-driven decisions, and the cruel barbs he'd throw behind closed doors. What hurt Linda most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the disrespect. In private, she'd later call him a climber who lost his soul chasing fame. But Henley wasn't the only one who crossed a line. Because Linda's next feud, it didn't unfold quietly backstage, it played out live in front of an audience, complete with a drunken frontman, a hijacked mic, and a moment of humiliation so public she never forgave it. When protest turned personal, Neil Young. It was 1976. A benefit concert for farm workers had brought together some of the biggest names in rock, including two artists known not just for their voices, but their convictions, Linda Ronstadt and Neil Young. On the surface, they were allies, united for a cause they both deeply believed in, but once the spotlight hit, everything changed. Backstage tensions boiled over when Neil began dismissing Linda's artistic input. He rejected her set suggestions, blocked her from performing certain songs, and even criticized her sound as being too commercial. To make things worse, after the show, he reportedly told the press that she wasn't built for protest. The implication was clear. Linda wasn't authentic enough for the fight. She left the venue in tears. It wasn't just an insult. It was a betrayal from someone she had respected, someone she thought stood for the same values. Being painted as hollow by a fellow activist cut deeper than any critic ever could. That night marked a turning point. From that moment on, no matter how noble the cause, Linda never shared a stage with Neil Young again. Behind closed doors, she called him loud in message, cruel in execution. To her, his activism rang hollow when paired with that kind of arrogance. But if that moment shook her personally, the next one would devastate her artistically. Because the next betrayal didn't come from backstage politics or public statements. It came in the middle of a studio session, in front of a full room of musicians, where Linda was stripped of her confidence with just one chilling line. Perfection or control. Paul Simon's cold dismissal. In 1982, it seemed like the perfect collaboration. Paul Simon, one of the most respected songwriters of his time, and Linda Ronstadt, the reigning queen of genre-defying vocals. When she agreed to duet with him for his upcoming album, fans and industry insiders alike buzzed with excitement. On paper, it was a dream. In reality, it was a slow-burning nightmare. From the first rehearsal, things felt off. Simon nitpicked her delivery, interrupting takes to correct phrasing that didn't need fixing. He rewrote lyrics without consulting her and offered vocal advice that felt more like thinly veiled criticism. According to those close to Linda, she later described the experience as feeling like being scolded by a principal. Every note she sang was met with scrutiny, not support. The chemistry never materialized. The creative spark fizzled under the weight of ego and condescension. The song was ultimately shelved, unfinished, unreleased, and unspoken of for years. But for Linda, the damage wasn't about one track. It was about being treated as less than. A voice like hers, a legacy like hers, deserved a partner. Instead, she got a dictator. After that, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would never step into a studio with Paul Simon again. And with that final fracture, Linda Ronstadt's silence on her biggest betrayals had officially unraveled. 7 musicians, 7 scars, all hidden behind decades of elegance, until now, because behind every harmony, there's a story no one hears, until someone dares to tell it. Why she kept it quiet all these years. Linda Ronstadt has never been one to feed the gossip machine. For decades, she let the music speak. But these revelations aren't about revenge. They're about truth. She built her legacy not just on talent, but on surviving egos, betrayals, and a ruthless industry. And in finally telling these stories, she's not tearing others down. She's lifting a veil. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in the songs we sing, but in the silence we choose to break. Which of these stories shocked you the most? And do you think Linda was right to stay silent all those years? Let us know below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.